Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and this is AART, the podcast where we get to know the women behind their art.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
My guest this week is Korean-American ceramicist Michelle Im, aka Rat Chicks. Michelle was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1984 to Kun Suk Im, a homemaker, and Yong Soing Im, an environmental engineer. She has one brother, Suwon Im, who is a financial consultant, also living in the US. Her grandmother was a poet and calligraphy artist in South Korea. Michelle returned to the US for college, and since graduating with a degree in biology and art from the State University of New York at Buffalo, she has lived in New York City. She was named one of Ceramic Monthly's 2022 Emerging Artists and is an award recipient of the American Craft Council's 2022 Emerging Artist Cohort Program, as well as a grant recipient of the Center for Crafts Teaching Artist Cohort in 2023. Michelle was a visiting artist in residence at the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts in 2022, and she was selected for a distinguished fellowship at Penland School of Craft during her winter residency in 2023. Before becoming a full-time ceramicist, Michelle spent time in the service industry, and since 2021, she's had her own studio in Queens, where she lives with her partner, artist John Almanza, and her dog Inky. She teaches ceramics at Greenwich House Pottery in Manhattan, New York. Michelle, hi, welcome to the AART Podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, first of all, I have to get one thing out of the way, Michelle. Your dream to one day breed rats with birds.
Yeah.
Please explain what that's about.
So I came up with the name Rat Chicks several years ago. I was just thinking of a name that's, just kind of, I don't know. I forget what I was thinking about, but it was just one night I was like with my friends and I'm like, Rat Chicks, that's what I'm going to call my ceramic production line. And it just kind of clicked. But I like this idea. I guess it comes from this idea of like mixing things together. And I feel like you can kind of see it through the surface decorations. But it's like, I guess it's about like pairing things that don't go together. So if you look at some of the surface decorations that I do, I try to, and some of these ideas kind of come organically. And sometimes I have like a list of different like pattern elements that I want to cross. So I'll like put things together that don't quite make sense, putting like objects together with animals specifically. And I feel like Rat Chicks kind of, it like symbolizes that, like mixing a rat and a bird, which are two kind of like mascots of where I live, two basically nuisance. People always ask me if I like pigeons or rats, and that's why I put them together. But honestly, like they're the two things that I really dislike about being here. And it's like this fantasy of like mixing them. And what if like the crossbreed would be like an interesting animal to deal with in New York.
Yeah, because you are right in the thick of it there where you've got both, right? But there's beauty as well in New York. So, and that comes across
True.
In the beautiful, beautiful ceramics that you produce, and so colorful, so joyous. I mean, there's just so many ways to describe your ceramics. And I think they encompass so many different aspects of life and joy, and it clearly looks like you have a sense of humor as well, Michelle. And I'm wondering where that comes from. Is there some mischief in you?
I think so. I feel like my work is about like connecting with others. And I think like sometimes the experience of living in New York, even though we're like constantly bumping into other people and just being exposed to like all different cultures, I think there's like some loneliness like in the city, like the feeling of like being isolated and just being a little bit like kind of in the thick of, you know, working, you know, constantly working and the hustle of being in the city. So I think, you know, through my work, I feel like I am trying to connect with others in like this visual language. And also, you know, ceramics lends itself well to making functional objects. So yeah. And then I think like humor for me comes into play, you know, with connecting with others, and especially with like connecting with people that you feel like that feel like unreachable. You know, I just think like humor has always been a way for me to just connect on a level that feels like visceral, you know, just everyone can relate to humor, you know, aside from like differences in ideology or political views. For some reason, I just think that like once you crack a joke and you create this laughter, it really brings humanity together. So that's kind of like where that comes from.
Because you're combining two different cultures, very different cultures, with South Korea and being American and born here in the States. But with your parents being South Korean, did they have that sense of humor?
Well, I think part of it is like in Korean culture, and I don't know if you're familiar with like Korean cinema and things like that, but I feel like the common theme, there's a lot of like dark humor that exists in Korean culture, and you see that in the movies. And I feel like both of my parents are funny in different ways. Like my dad is kind of more goofy and kind of clown-like. And then my mom, like sometimes when I talk to her, I just like start laughing, but like her sense of humor is very dark, which I think you see it in like do you know Bong Joon-ho, who made Parasite recently? But I don't know, there's this thread of like dark comedy, which I think stems from like the history of South Korea, from like the Japanese occupation. And there's like a word, there's even like a specific word for generational trauma, which is Han. And yeah, I don't know, these themes are kind of interesting to me, or I relate to it in that, like, you know, there is a thing called Korean rage, and in most recent media culture, you see beef. I don't know if you saw that Netflix series, but it is about all of that, about this like deep-seated kind of rage from being oppressed and all that. So.
Yeah, one of our guests here on the show, Akiko Steinberger, actually did the movie poster for Beef.
Oh, that's so cool.
So, yeah, I get that, and seeing, you know, Korean movies as well. But I'm wondering, as a child, were you the joyous one? Were you the creative, joyous little girl?
Yeah, I feel like from a very early age, I always wanted to be an artist. And I had this memory of like before I moved to Korea, I lived just outside of Boston, and my mom was always really good about like exposing me to different arts. And she enrolled me into this clay animation class at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I still remember like being there as a kid and just seeing adults making ceramic figurines there. And like, I remember in that moment, I was like, wow, like this is like, that's who I want to be later. And I didn't, you know, pursue ceramics starting that early, but I just remember the feeling of like, I want to be an artist. And that like clay animation class was it's still so vivid in my memory. And like, I was so hooked on it that, there was like a blizzard, during the session, on one of the weekends. And my mom still talks about it, but, I like basically forced my mom or begged her to get in the car to take me to this class, even though there was like a blizzard coming. So my mom like still talks about it, how she drove 5 miles an hour for like 2 hours to take me to this class. And I remember like we couldn't see the road and we had to stop, and we ended up at this furniture store. And I think that my mom maybe was a little stressed out, and like she ended up buying a dining table that day, which we still have. It's in Korea where my parents live. And we took me, and she got me there to that class. And I remember, I still don't know why the class was happening still. Cause like we went there and the teacher was there and was like in shock that we even like showed up. But I remember I was just like the only one there. And I was just so happy that we got there. But yeah, I was always like kind of a little bit goofy, and I get that from my dad. And I think part of the artistic side of me does come from my dad. My dad used to like take me on nature walks. He was an environmental scientist and was really, and still is, like very connected to nature. And so he would take me out on walks and we would do watercolor paintings outside. And I used to always watch him at the dining table, like always painting from nature reference books. So yeah.
And how about your mother? What did she do?
She was a homemaker. Yeah, she just, that's pretty typical of her generation, in South Korea. So yeah, she was my mom. That was her job.
Full-time job. I understand that.
Yeah. And it definitely was a full-time job because I think I was a lot for her.
I wonder if she would say that now. It was all worthwhile, I'm sure.
I hope so.
You were born in Atlanta, Georgia. Tell us about how your parents came to be here, because they subsequently moved back to South Korea.
Yeah, so originally my parents came here with my brother. My brother was born in Korea, and they came because my dad was pursuing a PhD degree in environmental science or environmental engineering. So he came as a student, and then I was born, and then he was finishing up his PhD degree. And then we moved around so much, but I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but I only lived there for like 8 months. So I just like have no connection to it. But we were in Boston after he graduated, and he worked there. He got a job at Tufts University before, and then my family always wanted to, they came to the US with the plan to go back to South Korea. And then, I think like maybe 18 years had passed until they finally returned to Korea. But yeah, I was 11 when we moved back to South Korea. And that kind of like it was just like a big life-changing event, I have to say. Yeah.
I'm sure it must have been, and not least of all now language-wise. What language did you speak with your family at home?
Yeah, so I would say English is my first language, even though my mom spoke to me in Korean, but I never formally learned Korean until I moved to Korea. So like, I mean, I can understand simple things like come have dinner or, just like home language. But when I went to Korea, I had no idea what people were saying in school. And it was such a big culture shock, and like still to this day, that experience of moving there and experiencing this whole other thing, it still affects me. Like, and I think a lot of that is like in my work of just like navigating two very opposite kind of ways of being,
Yeah, and parallel lifestyles. I mean, it must have been interesting in a way because you're learning your family culture and that sort of thing, as well as the language. But what about art as well? Because Oriental art is just so beautiful, and it comes across in your work clearly, Michelle. And I'm wondering how you absorbed yourself in art and in your interest in ceramics when you were in your teenage years there.
So I have to say, like, I didn't come to ceramics until later in my adulthood. So, but art-wise in Korea, well, that was probably because I knew I wanted to be an artist. Living in South Korea as an adolescent was pretty difficult on top of everything else because I felt like I couldn't really pursue it because in South Korea, it's like just hyper competitive in all fields. So usually when you're, and now things have really changed, but when I was going to school there, it was very much like, if you are going to be an artist, you kind of start training when you're very little. And so you go to an art specialized middle school, and then a specialized high school, and then, getting into an art college even is like, it's like becoming a doctor, like the pathway to it is like, it's really intense. Like the training was very rigid. And so it wasn't like the way I wanted to pursue art. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I felt like it was necessary for me to come back to the US. Also, I was just like failing at every class in Korea, just like not really going anywhere academically and even artistically, because like, I mean, the arts training that you get in Korea is very like, again, just very strict. I didn't do ceramics then. But I think like, obviously like having spent 5 years there, you absorb your surrounding visually, and it just like carries on within you. And I think when I started doing ceramics, I was really at first like interested in digging into historical Korean ceramics. I was just kind of drawn to it naturally, and it just like kind of made sense to me. Or not all Korean ceramics make me feel that way, but there are certain periods when I look at the works, you almost kind of feel like heard in some way. And then also to add to that, my uncle, he had a ceramic manufacturing company in China for 30 years. So, and it was funny because he was making, his factory was producing imitation Dutch Delftware, which originally was an imitation of Chinese blue and white porcelain. So kind of coming back full circle. But I grew up with all these weird ceramic trinkets that came out of my uncle's factory. So there's that too. Just like strange, like souvenir items, like fake Dutch Delftware souvenir, blue and white clogs, things like that, windmills, and then like strange, like Hollywood souvenir ceramic objects too. But yeah, like all of that, surrounding you. I feel like the visual landscape of your everyday life in Korea is just so different than here, and your exposure to ceramics, I think, it's vastly different than here. I think the kinds of objects that you are that you come across.
Yes, clearly very, very different with Oriental. Where now, in terms of influences, though, Michelle, the artists that whose work you were maybe following at that time, or teachers that you may have? Who was it that really impacted you?
Yeah, so right before I got into ceramics, I was actually trying to become a painter. And I don't know. I think like from having gone to, so I should backtrack. So in undergrad, I started off at the art school, and then I ended up majoring in biology and minoring in art for a lot of different reasons. And I can talk about that a little bit later. But so, and some of the problems with art school that I faced, I think, is just like, and thinking about becoming a painter, it was like I just like had all of this like important artworks that were like looming over my head, you know, and so pursuing painting just felt so distant from myself trying to pursue it. And then it's like the medium of ceramics, you know, that when I first tried it, I was like, you know, this is it. Like, I'm not a painter. I want to be a ceramicist. And it just felt, you almost like feel it physically, like in your body. And I would have to say, rather than like one specific person or individuals that really influenced me, I came about ceramics in kind of an informal way. So not formal academic training, but so I do feel like I have to give credit to Greenwich House Pottery, where I first learned ceramics in Manhattan. So if you're unfamiliar with Greenwich House, it's one of the oldest ceramic community studios in New York. It was like founded in 1909, and so along with it, there's just this long history, and so. When I first started ceramics there, everyone that it's a community, and I feel like I learned so much from the community as a whole, taking classes there. So I would say that's, you know, where the influence started with my ceramics.
I know from my own experience, you know, going to ceramics classes is a very social thing.
Yes, very social.
And in terms of the physicality too, you said, you know, how painting wasn't for you, but ceramics clearly is. It's a different kind of physical expression, isn't it? Talk yes. about that and how that touches your soul, what it actually means to you.
Well, it's like with ceramics, it feels for me personally like there's more of a bodily connection or contact, you know, with the material. It feels like when you're in the process of making, your whole body is in it, and therefore everything else connected to your body is in it too. So your mind and your soul, not to sound so woo-woo, but it's just everything. Your whole presence is like in the moment of making, and especially if you're on the wheel, because that's where I started. I don't do any wheel throwing anymore, but that's how I got into ceramics. And so when you're on the wheel and the wheel is turning, all you can do is react to that very moment, which I think is, I mean, I guess it happens in painting, but it's different. It's very time based, you know, this ceramics thing. So it really brings you into the present moment, which I think I was drawn to.
As well as the culture, and you're combining the two different cultures, Michelle, how does religion play a part in your life, or does it at all?
Oh, God. Haven't really thought about that. My parents were atheists growing up, which is very atypical in the U.S. Usually you see a lot of Korean American communities, like taking place within the church. But my parents, because my dad was a scientist and my mom is kind of a skepticist, they were just naturally atheists. They just really did not believe in God or any of that. So I didn't really grow up near church or religion. I was always kind of thought I feel like my dad always taught me to just think more rationally and logically. Not that church is illogical in its entirety, but funny enough, though, my parents are older now. And I would say in the last 10 years, they became part of a church community in South Korea. So they have become more religious. But me personally, I wouldn't say that I'm very religious at all, but I think like I'll just always go back to nature in terms of like thinking about where my spirituality is. Like, I think whenever I am in nature, I do feel, again, just viscerally, like in your body, you do feel like there's something more than this. But I wouldn't say that I'm a very like religious person per se.
But I read that in your work, you try to marry your two different cultures, the diametrically opposed systems of culture, individualism and collectivism. Unpack that a little bit for me and how that manifests today and continues. But this is obviously a continuum for you.
Yeah. So when I went to South Korea at age 11, again, like this, that was just like such a big life-changing moment, because prior to that, I was going to school in the suburbs of Boston, and I was one of maybe 2 Asian people in my school. And before I went to Korea, I was really excited. I was really excited to be among other people that looked like me. and I told all my white girlfriends, I was like, oh, I'm going to my motherland. And I was like really excited. And then when I went to Korea, it was just, I don't know how to describe it other than it was like kind of insane. You look around and I'm like, wow, everyone looks just like me. But the feeling was like, not this feeling of connection, but I became like a big time foreigner. And I didn't speak the language. I didn't understand the culture really. And a main theme is like learning about what collectivity or collectivism means in South Korea is so different from here. I mean, the American culture is very individualistic, and this is tied to a lot of other things, politics and all of that too. But in South Korea, what it means to be in community and in a collective society is just, it was very shocking to me, even going to school, the boundaries are different between you and another person. And I think that exists, it's like baked into the language also, because when you say, for example, in English, my mom, like when you talk to another person, you're talking about your mom, you say, my mom is this, or my dad is this. And the word my comes into it. But in the Korean language, that is a very strange thing to say, actually. So in Korean, we say 우리 엄마, which means our mom. Even when you're just having a one-on-one conversation, when you're talking to the next person, you refer to your mother, your own mother, as our mom. So it's like it's baked into the language of collectivism. And so that was a very like interesting thing for me to think about, and still is today, because I think just, and that's also why I'm interested in how languages, it allows for different kinds of thoughts to occur. Because when I think in the Korean language, I do kind of actually start thinking more collectively. Like I think like I feel as though like you and I are more connected, as opposed to when I think in the English language. It's a very strange thing to like feel, and then also just like when I remember one of the first times in Korea, like my friends wanted to hold my hand or like link arms. Like we would link arms like in groups of 5 and walk together. Like and I found that really strange that like people wanted to like touch me because in the US it's just like, no, like I am my own being and you are yours. And, there are boundaries. And so we don't touch each other. And that's like kind of like not great behavior. So little things like that really just kind of was mind blowing. And then on top of that is, I think like the most difficult thing for me living there was like corporal punishment. And so and it's funny to think about this too, because for an American, the thought of like your child going to school and getting hit by your teachers is just unthinkable. It's like it's something that you would see on the news. But in Korea, that was pretty common, and the laws have changed now. But when I went to school, like the way we were punished, I think it was like some initiative to reinforce the fact that we are a group as a society. There is no me and you. Like, a good economy for all benefits the individual. So I remember going to school like, and I would like, if one person did something wrong, the whole classroom would be punished. And I have like crazy memories of like I would be sitting kneeled on top of my desk with my shoes and socks off, holding a chair above my head, and getting beatings on my feet. And when I say this out loud, and even talk about it and describe this experience in English to an American, it really sounds like some crazy torture, thing. But when I talk about this with other Koreans, it's just kind of like that's just how we grow up. Like that's just part of our culture, so it's like this divide in ways of thinking about different things that, is a constant thing that is a part of me as an adult.
Do you carry that trauma?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, it took me a really long time to like understand it fully. I think so when I came back from Korea, I was like 16 or turning 17. And I think through my 20s, I didn't have a great way of processing it. And so the trauma, I think, would like manifest in different ways. But I mean, now I'm almost 40, and I feel like I've slowly kind of processed through all of those things. But yeah, it definitely, when I look back, I still think of it as like a very traumatic event in my life, and definitely affects me.
Even though you could rationalize it.
Yeah. I mean, so that's why I kind of feel divided because I learned to really love this idea of collectivism and looking out for each other, and of having that community. I think that even the word community is so different in South Korea than here. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about just now?
Well, rationalizing that kind of discipline culture that has traumatized you and left you with trauma probably for life, and being able to rationalize it, though.
Yeah. so that's where the divide is in my brain. It's just like, I can rationalize it. I am mature and old enough to understand like where these ideas come from. But yeah, it's still, it's still a struggle, even in my relationship with my parents too. Like, I'm going to go see them in South Korea in November, which will be kind of interesting because I haven't seen my parents in 7 years, which is kind of crazy when I think about it. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think most people feel this, though. It's just like the feeling of being pulled in two different directions. It's like, I love my parents, of course, they're so dear to me, but also there is a part of me inside where I'm like, how did you not think that this would, like, how did you not consider how this would impact me? Taking me to South Korea when I'm like going through my adolescence, from a very different culture. So yeah, maybe I definitely am still processing, that experience, and perhaps like it comes through in my work, just kind of figuring out the problems and the issues, and personally and politically and economically, culturally, all of these things, everything just feels like in every situation, there are two different ideas that you're trying to create harmony out of.
And I was going to ask you how you choose to be stay connected with your Korean heritage, in terms of maintaining the language, as well as connected with your family, but also with the language and the culture.
Yeah, that's something I feel like is becoming more distant in a way, like just living longer and longer in New York. But Korean food is a very big part of my life. Language-wise, I do feel like I'm becoming more distant. But it's so weird. Like, language is so weird because, like, when I visit Korea, it usually within like 3 or 4 days, it's a very disorienting feeling when I go there, because after like a few days, my thinking language starts to switch over, so I go from like thinking all the time in English, and then as soon as I get there, or within a few days, my thoughts start to switch over into thinking in the Korean language, which I find very fascinating. and then when I start thinking in Korean, I notice my thoughts about the world starts changing too. Thoughts about society and how I relate to one another, all of these things start changing, which is very disorienting for me. I think maybe because I'm just very sensitive, but and then of course when I come back to the US, that thinking comes back to, it starts switching back to English. And when that switch comes fully back, I don't know, my feelings change. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's why I think like language is so fascinating. Like,
it's a huge gear shift, I would imagine. And does your family live in the culture, or in the countryside, or in the city?
They live 1 hour outside of the capital of Seoul.
So does that make a difference as well then? Because you're deep in New York City. You're a real New Yorker.
Yeah, but in Korea, it's fairly urban, I would say. Like, the lifestyle is very urban in most cities, unless you're like I never lived in like the countryside of Korea. So where my parents live, it's still pretty much like a city, or very, very urban. So the day-to-day life is kind of similar in terms of like you live in an apartment building and there are high rises everywhere, and it is also very fast paced there. So
yeah, it's very similarities there between the two. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that your grandmother was a poet and a calligraphy artist as well. Do you have a connection with your grandparents on either side?
Yeah, so my grandmother passed away some time ago. She lived to like 9. How old was she? She lived very long, but yeah, she lived a very traditional, like Korean housewife kind of life until my grandfather passed to, no, he was still alive. But it was like later in life when my grandmother, I want to say like in her 40s or something like that, she all of a sudden was like, screw this family thing. Like I'm going to be an artist. So, and, yes. So she became a poet, and she's like an amazing calligraphy artist. And I have these like panels in South Korea that she produced. I would say she was a very creative person, a very dynamic and creative person. I regret that I didn't have a very close relationship with her, and that's due to a lot of different reasons. But yeah.
Was that on your father's side or your mother?
My mother's side. My father is like the youngest of, I don't know, like 8 siblings. And I think I never actually got a chance to meet my grandparents on my father's side. Yeah. And
what does your older brother, Suwon, what does he do?
My brother is oh my God, every time someone asks me, I'm like, he does something in finances. I have no idea. And honestly, I just want to say that because like, I have no idea, like really, I mean, he's explained to me and I asked him what he does, but like, he's like a financial, I don't know, like consultant or something or another. But like, yeah, he works for Cisco, and he's actually near you in Maryland. But but he started his family, like he got married very young, like 23, and started having kids, and he's still with his wife. And so he's lived a very, very different life than me.
You are the creative one, absolutely. At what point, though, when you mentioned you went to Buffalo to the State University there, and you read art, but also you did biology. You mentioned.
Yeah.
You choose biology.
I was having a really hard time in art school. So I actually started off at the University of Michigan at the art school there. And then for a lot of different reasons, I moved to Buffalo because I had family there. And I was going through a really hard time then. And that was just like a few years after I had moved back from Korea. So I was just going through a lot. So my family thought it would be a good idea for me to be with relatives. So I lived with my aunt and my uncle in Buffalo. And then I transferred there. And then I was an art major at first. So, but then like halfway through undergrad at Buffalo, I just felt like I was hitting a wall. Like I really didn't enjoy art critiques at all. I felt it made me feel, and in a time where I was like going through a very unstable period in my life, I think being in the art school and going through critiques, I think added to my instability, the feeling of instability. I don't know, it just didn't really mesh well, I think. And I just wanted to make art privately and enjoy that. And I think like art school was kind of taking away some of the joy that I wanted to experience in art making. And then simultaneously, I just felt like I needed more, I wanted to learn something in school that I would otherwise not learn. So I was also interested in science too. And maybe that there's that dichotomy there. But I like this idea of creating harmony. So naturally I felt like art and biology, I think made sense for me at the time. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with biology, but learning sciences in undergrad was kind of liberating. I think after having some time in art school, I just felt like I could get through school with some objectives in mind. And learning about something completely in a very different field was very stimulating for me. And then I went about a lot of different career options. But long story short, towards the end of undergrad, I think I became a little bit more radicalized, or however way you call it, but this was in 2008, but towards the end of undergrad, long story short, I was just really gung-ho about the ideals of creating social change. And I wanted to come to New York City as a teacher. So I joined a Teach for America program and that's how I came to New York City. I didn't necessarily come to New York thinking I wanted to be an artist. Although all my life I wanted to be an artist. At that time, at the end of undergrad, I wanted to come as an educator, and I wanted to become part of a movement. And so yeah, I first was a public school teacher, and of course, quickly learned what my limitations were.
And how did the journey evolve from there then, once you decided to change course?
Well, it was very challenging to teach in New York City. I was very young. I was 23, and also I have a baby face. So when I walk into a classroom, it doesn't help. And it was full of struggle. I realized quickly that things I had in mind in theory, it was really hard to produce in real time. So of course I burnt out, and I thought it would be best for me to take a break. And I guess this activist part of me just kind of was in defeat. And so for some time, I got into the restaurant industry, actually. So I was working in the service industry. And then around the same time, I just had this urge of I got to go back to making art. So when I started working in restaurants, I was like, this is great. A restaurant is a great way to gain income while pursuing creative things. So that's kind of where I got back into making art. And then shortly after I started working in the restaurant industry, that's when I got into ceramics. So that was about 10 plus years ago now. And so I've always had this model of working in the restaurant to provide income and studio time. And I just kind of went from there. And then, of course, now, I teach ceramics. And I've come back to this teaching role, I think, in a much healthier way. But yeah.
At what point then did you reach that tipping point that you could give up the service industry and become a full-time ceramicist and tutor?
So prior to the pandemic, I felt like I had some moments where I was like maybe gaining traction or even like confidence in perhaps thinking about pursuing a full-time studio practice. And also I was like getting really burnt out in the service industry. Like I worked in a fine dining Michelin star sushi restaurant, where I wore a black suit every night, and the style of service was super rigid, and there is some beauty to that, but doing that night after night, it really kind of like crushes your soul. So I was getting burnt out, and then simultaneously I was I had started making work that I felt that was my true expression. So getting into surface decoration and a lot of the different like illustrative things that I do now, I think that started then, right, kind of like maybe a year or two before the pandemic. And then the pandemic came, and then I was kicked out of the service industry like many others. And I took that as a sign, and I felt like, well, if I don't really push myself to do this now, I'll probably go back to the service industry, and that's not what I wanted. So that's when I started pursuing it full time. And then in 2021, I opened my studio. I had been working out of a communal studio for some time. And like we were saying earlier, how ceramics is a very social activity. I was definitely ready to have my practice in a space where I didn't have to socialize and just regain the focus that I needed to really pursue, further develop my work. So yeah, in 2021, I opened my studio, and here I am now. I'm still in that studio. And yeah, it's just crazy how life brings you all these different changes when you least expect it. And I know the pandemic was hard for everybody and for myself, but also it was a blessing in disguise. And it really made me evaluate what it is that I wanted in life. And I'm very glad that I got out of the service industry and I am doing this thing that I love.
Well, clearly you do love it. The passion shows in your work, the beautiful, beautiful work that you do, Michelle, and the colors too. I just love your coloring, and it's just so intricate that there is so much beauty in that. It must be enormously satisfying to even complete one piece. And I know from having dabbled a little bit in ceramics myself as a complete, weekend warrior, this is so intricate and it's so beautiful. But most artists, when they start off, have a little bit of a difficulty just finding how to commercialize this. And art and commercialization don't necessarily go hand in hand, and finding a way of marketing it too, and realizing that you could actually sell this and make a living out of this. Was that an easy transition for you? How did that happen? Because it seems like you've built a little empire now. So what was the beginning like?
Oh my God, it's like such a learning curve, because for the longest time when I was in the service industry, like I had income. So I didn't, and that was, on purpose too. Like I didn't want to make ceramics right away with the purpose of selling. Like I really focused on like, how do I discover this voice I have through this media? And that has always been my goal. I would say in the first 7 to 8 years of this ceramic practice. And then I feel like it happened organically in some ways, like in the very beginning when I when I transitioned into a full-time practice, because I was starting to sell pieces, and I realized, and my work was at a point where I felt confident that like, oh, this is the work that I feel comfortable or feel good about selling. You know, I feel like there is like this point where you reach. And my thing also is like, I feel like in New York, you see a lot of ceramicists who like jump right in and then with the goal of selling, you know, right from the beginning to commercialize it. And I found that, I don't know, that didn't really sit well with me personally, because one, it's like so hard to make a living off of ceramics. And in my mind at the beginning, I was like, there's so many better ways to like earn an income than to sell a mug or two. So yeah, when I started selling my work, one, I was feeling confident about my work. I felt that it was like my true expression, and then it was selling. So I was like, oh, that's a good thing. And then navigating the marketing part. Yeah, that is a very hard thing. And this is like an ongoing conversation I have with other artists. And people ask me a lot, like how I go about it, because it's a reality that artists have to face, which can feel jarring. Like it can feel very like in opposition to your art practice, but it is something that you kind of have to do, especially in a city like New York, where every breath feels like it costs money. You know, just the moment you wake up, you know, the time is ticking. So navigating that has definitely been very challenging. I have to say, I'm fortunate enough that I got so the American Craft Council has an emerging artist cohort program, and I was selected for that last year in 2022. And it's like that program really helped me in so many ways. You know, there's a grant attached to it, but also it's like a program for artists like myself that are trying to navigate the pragmatics of it and the logistics of essentially running a business, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, even, you know, the galleries that you walk through in Chelsea, like at the end of the day, they are businesses, and there is a business component to running a gallery. And so in the same way, being an artist, you know, requires all of these other different things, which is managing your finances, marketing, and navigating where your work should go, you know, placing your work. And so the Craft Council has really, I'm just still very like fortunate to be a part of that program. And I learned so much about how I can make my practice more sustainable. And it's still a work in progress. But yeah, I think this year I would say it's the picture's a little bit more clear than last year, in that I have a slightly clearer picture of what steps I need to take in my practice to make this actually sustainable for New York. And maybe part of this is like, I need to leave New York City, but yeah, it's definitely difficult, the marketing part of it.
Another chapter to come. But are you an art collector yourself, Michelle?
I collect ceramics, functional ceramics. I just love it. Wherever I go, if I go to a residency or, you know, just meeting new ceramic artists that become my friends. I love that part of ceramics is, you know, waking up and I have a pretty good ceramic mug collection. That's kind of what I collect. And it's funny because the kinds of mugs I want to collect are usually just completely opposite of my work. I like to collect brown pots. Apparently, I just like look at my cupboard and like I love wood-fired pottery because really appreciate the labor, the sheer amount of labor that goes into it. It's just insane. Just this wood fire thing. Every time I think about it, I'm like, this is, I don't get how people can do it. You know, I've done a wood fire once and it was like an amazing experience, but the sheer level of like, you know, you're pushing logs over from here to there and you have to get more wood. And then the firing lasts like 5 days. And so, yeah, a lot of what I feel like when I look in my cupboards, I feel like you'll see a lot of wood-fired stuff, brown pots. There's some colorful things, you know, but I think like when I come home from the studio, like I need to, like, I don't really, I like to kind of take a break from my ceramics. So I don't have a lot of my own work at home. There are a few pieces, but I want to engage with ceramics with someone who has a different mind. I really like that. And I think you see what a wood fire maker is thinking about is so different from what I think about in my own work. And I really appreciate that. Like, that's something that I really want in my day to day. So yeah, I do collect ceramics specifically.
Have you ever been tempted to go back to Korea as an artist in residence, say, and just for the sake of actually using that system of ceramics and their methods?
You know, I was thinking about that just because I'm thinking about going to visit my parents, and it would be really amazing to do a residency there or be more connected with the ceramics community in Korea. It makes me feel a little bit like also not, what is the word? I wonder how it would feel because the ceramics education system there is also, it's a very rigid one. You know, usually there's like an apprenticeship involved, and there's a lot of like old school male dominant potters that make very large pots and like, you know, traditional Korean ceramics has such a presence in even contemporary Korean ceramics, Korean ceramic works. And I think it's related to like the training involved. And I remember the last time I went to Korea, I actually went to a pottery village. It's called Icheon. And so my uncle took me there, and my uncle is like, he knows a lot of these like ceramic people and stuff because he was a ceramic engineer. And everyone that I met, you know, I experienced this thing where, I don't know, I felt like I wasn't maybe like good enough, or I didn't have the right training in their eyes. and that's something that I experienced as an adolescent too, like to be considered an artist, like you have to go through this like rigid training. And, you know, I already said that's one of the reasons why I left. But I remember this specific conversation I had with a female ceramic artist who made functional work. And in this small conversation, you know, she asked me, of course, you know, where I went to school. And I explained to her that I didn't go to school for ceramics. And she looked very confused. And she asked me, she like paused for a second, and she was like, I don't get it. Like, do you do it then for fun? Or do you do ceramics because then you like it? And I'm like, yeah. do you not do it because do you do it because I mean, I don't know. There was just like such a strange question to be asked, but it is coming from the education system there, which is in some ways like, you know, I mean, there's a balance though. It's like, I really do appreciate, because Korea has such a long, deep-rooted like history in ceramics, and so of course, like I appreciate it, and I love looking at ancient Korean ceramics. But but yeah, the rigidity of like the education system there is, it's, I like the idea of making art with a sense of freedom, and that's probably why I didn't finish art school. I like to approach art making from like my center, and whatever it is that I want to pursue artistically, I've always had this feeling of like, it needs to come from my center, and it can't come from outside. It's like that the starting point, I think, is different when you go through an apprenticeship and yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be cool to go back and to be in touch and to engage, and maybe, in the future that will happen.
Maybe down the road. And I think it seems to me now that you are very much centered in what you're doing, what you're producing, and it's coming out of a passion that you have, and a very creative passion too. Where can we find your art, Michelle?
Well, in the lovely world of Instagram, you can find me there. I go by Ratchicks again, but it's spelled with an X in between, which makes it more complicated. I don't know why I did that, but it is Rat X Chicks, CHICKS. It's when a rat and a bird meets and crosses. But you can find me there, and then I also have a website, but all of those links you'll be able to find it through the Instagram account.
Yes, and we'll, of course, have the links in the show notes with this episode as well. And I'm wondering where they can physically come to see your work, if it's in galleries anywhere in New York.
Well, you can come visit my studio. I'm in Ridgewood, Queens. And if you send me a message, I'm usually open to studio visits. I'm usually there alone with my dog. So having the occasional visitor is usually quite nice and pleasant. So just reach out, And I have some shows coming up this fall, but yeah, you'll see all of that through my social account, I guess.
Yeah, they'll find that on your social media.
Yeah.
So now you've mentioned your dogs, I have to ask what dog you have.
Oh, my dog, Inky. He's a long-haired Chihuahua mix. He has long black hair hanging down from his ears, like a long hair Chihuahua. But I think he's mixed with maybe a Papillon, because he's like.
Yes, it sounded like it when you described that. And has he been reproduced in your ceramics?
No, I haven't done any Inky themed pieces, although I keep thinking about it. But no, he doesn't really appear in my work. His spirit does.
Oh, I'm sure. Very much so. Yes, I can just imagine. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed hearing your story.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's so nice to share and talk about all this stuff that you can't really see in a bio or read in a bio, or, it's so nice to kind of share this story with you.
Well, we really enjoyed having you, and the very best of luck with your career in future. Continue to make the beautiful, beautiful ceramics.
Thank you so much.
And you'll find links to Michelle's social media and to her website in the show notes accompanying this episode. You can also follow us on Instagram at the AART Podcast, that's art with 2 A's, and also on Facebook at Hollowell Studios, where you can leave your comments, questions, or suggestions for guests. We would love to hear from you. And we'd also love it, as usual, if you do have a moment to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because that improves our rankings and helps others find the show. And I'm delighted to tell you that just a few months into the show now, we only began on April the 1st with this weekly show, we are already in the top 5% of 3.1 million podcasts worldwide, which is extraordinary. And it's all thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in every week to a new episode. And we hope to bring you a lot more, because there are so many fabulous women artists out there in so many different disciplines. And we will be continuing to build the podcast in the months to come. So stay tuned for a lot more exciting artists. And I will be back next week with a new episode. So I do hope you'll join me then. In the meanwhile, my thanks again to my guest this week, Michelle Im.